Paranormal M invites you to experience the unexplained like never before. Subscribe and hit the bell to stay connected to our haunting tales. Let's dive into the darkness together. Some thoughts why adults less frequently see ghosts. I was stumbling across some ghost videos, which I rarely do now at this age. I've had previous encounters and situations with whatever's out there that has me thinking about what I have to say now. Please feel free to correct me, but I recall and now have vivid recollections about reading how over time, fluoride calcifies an eye or something in your brain, your pineal gland. This is considered the third eye and can be achieved, I guess, from meditating. Imagine if the fluoride in our everyday lives is brought to dull these actually sensations or beings around us. I believe this, as I used to frequently believe my house was haunted, at least when I grew up from the ages of 1, till I moved at about 2nd grade. I still have a vivid memory of playing with an RC car without batteries moving. I was a kid, so I shot up, grabbed my mom, and said, "Something around. Watch it move on its own when I ask." The car moved less than 5 seconds after me asking and giggling while my mom was being my mom, not showing any emotion in front of me, but probably said, "Oh my God." This stems a recollection where I would run past a chair and lamp in my parents' room during the night and sometimes during the day, as my room's doorway was centered to my hallway. This went on till I moved out of the house, but really just probably thought it was me being a kid at the time and never really mentioned it to my parents. Then fast forward. My dad had gone away for a few days. I was at the time watching a scary movie that I thought I could handle with my mom. The movie wasn't actually scary, but it was The Predator, and it scared the shit out of me at the time. I ended up crawling up next to my mom, as there was no way I could stay in my room by myself in the room alone. I woke up at the same night around 3 a.m., and I saw a white ghostly figure walk into my room. And if I recall, before laying back down, I really paid it no mind for a few years till we moved out of the house and brought it up to my mom. Come to find out, the previous owner of the house passed away in the chair mentioned before. My parents both said that at night there would be a figure sitting in the chair, and people such as my cousin who stayed a few days said they saw a man beside my dad in the house. Turns out I wasn't actually seeing things all along. Let's move forward a few years to high school, probably when such fluoride takes place, and may calcify what I said above. One Saturday morning, I remember before waking up and seeing the situation when the ghost had walked into my room. I was basically in a 3D perspective in my hallway watching this figure about to walk into my room until it stopped, turned, and made eye contact with me. I went into a seizure. Following years, I had the worst sleep paralysis. Woke up one night to a black figure standing above me in my guest room. That was where I decided to crash for the night randomly. My grandmother who passed used to stay in this room. Nowadays, I may see things in the corner of my eye, but nothing as vivid as the memories I've had before. This is just a heavy/random share by me. Thought it'd be nice to finally write it out. It's been in our water for longer than that. And products. Work office bathroom. I work in an office that's on the 2nd floor of a 2-story building. I've been here for almost a year. Since I started here, I've always felt a sense of dread every time I went into the women's bathroom. I've also had a few things that have happened while I've been in here. A few months ago, I recorded a voice text. I sent it to my husband. I was alone in the first stall. When playing it back, you can clearly hear a woman's voice that says Satan. Around that same time, one of the tiles in the ceiling was pushed up and moved so you could see all the way up inside. That's where it was very dark. It looked big enough to almost be an additional floor above us. I finally had to ask the cleaning staff to fix it because it creeped me out so bad. We have an automatic towel dispenser next to our sink. You have to sort of wave your hand in front of it for it to go off. One day while alone in there, both the dispenser and the sink went off by itself. Now I'm so scared to go in there that I'll hold the urge to go so long that I'll either go once in a 9-hour period or not go at all. How do I get rid of it? I'm worried that if I burn sage, it'll just set the smoke alarm off. 2 things. You gotta go to the bathroom. Second thing, turn off the smoke alarm. For a minute. Weird shit happening in my house at night. Hi. I'm writing this because I'm the kind of guy that never really believed in ghosts. But somehow, strange things keep happening in my house at night. To start off, 2 nights ago I suddenly woke up. I was in bed, didn't know the time, and heard noises coming from the kitchen downstairs. It was like someone was opening and closing drawers. I heard it 2 times. I checked my bed, the cat was with me. Anyway, I eventually just fell asleep. But the situation reminded me of another strange shit that happened and I actually removed. For example, about 2 months ago I woke up in the middle of the night. Heard some weird sounds coming from the furniture downstairs. Very unnatural ones, though. I even heard something fall pretty violently to the floor. Checked my bed, and the cat wasn't with me that night. Thought it could have been, but still stayed vigilant. After a while, my eyes kind of adapted to the darkness and started seeing better. That's when I started hearing some odd noises coming from my closet's doors, like something was passing really close or scratching them. The weird thing was that that room was completely empty. I saw there was nothing next to the doors. Kept looking and being vigilant. Still had no idea what was happening. It wasn't until after a while I felt something quickly touch and caress the upper part and back of my head. Something with no temperature. I think it was scary as shit, honestly, because I had no fucking explanation for that. My bed is located right next to the wall. The back of my head was facing it. There's nothing in the room with me. Another time I was laying in bed, probably early evening or morning. Turned around to look at the door and saw the outline of a black head looking at me from beside the door. As soon as I looked at it, it retreated behind the door in an instant and disappeared. Last night was fine. Mysterious memory. I want to share a random childhood memory that's always stuck with me. Never been able to explain it, and nothing has ever happened to me like it since. Has anyone else had any similar experiences or anything to add? Maybe even just certainty that I'm sure it was some military type of plane that flew over. In lieu of all of this weird drone stuff going on, I wanted to share my experience. Also, I want to add that my beliefs are that us humans are simply not the only intelligent life forms that exist in the universe. But I'm also a skeptic in that I think most unexplainable things do have an explanation most of the time. So one summer night, somewhere in 2007 or 2008, and that would make me 10 or 11, it was probably about 9 or 10 p.m. because of the darkness at the time. I live in Pennsylvania. My friend and I were walking from my house to hers, about 3 or 4 houses, maybe 100 yards away. Sorry, my brain works in customary. And all of a sudden, there was this indescribable boom that literally sent us to the floor. Like instinctually, automatically, we just hit the fucking deck. Grass stains and all. It was as if we were physically pushed to the ground through some force I can't describe. There's no flash of light like a transformer blowing or something. It was dark the whole time. Just one singular forceful boom. Seemed like no neighbors came out to assess what the fuck that was, despite how incredibly forceful it was to us. We slowly got up and wiped her knee and elbows off and went inside her house. We were like, "Did you guys hear that?" Everyone in her family was like, no. Weirdo kids in your imagination. We just moved on and whatever. But it's always stuck with me because it's just weird as hell. I've heard a sonic boom from a supersonic plane above at an airshow festival, and maybe it was similar, especially if you're not expecting it. But it was super weird to me either way. This was before we had cell phones and we were kids on summer vacation, so who knows what time it was when that happened. We just made it inside. So I've always wondered, what if we did have some lost time but just never realized? He warned me. The third time I won't wake up. I was walking down a dodgy street, trying to find my way back home. The only light was coming from some dim yellow street lamps. Then a taxi appeared out of nowhere and I flagged it down. The moment I sat down, something felt wrong. The air in the car was heavy, like I was trapped in a suffocating box. The driver was an older man. He was extremely skinny with sickly yellow skin, sunken eyes, and a terrifying, creepy smile. Sounds like the guy outside. He barely had any hair, and what was left was thin, white, and uneven. It was hanging in messy clumps around his head. That's when he asked, "Where are we going?" Chills ran down my spine. His voice was disgusting, almost inhuman. I gave him my address, but instead of talking the normal route, he turned down strange streets, speeding up as he drove. I started panicking and tried to open the doors, but he had locked them all. I started screaming, "Let me out!" And this is where I should be getting off. My family's waiting for me. Please. But he would just stare at me through the rearview mirror with a terrifying face, grinning at me with a smile that made me want to vomit. Eventually, the car stopped. We were in an empty parking lot, surrounded by nothing. This creature didn't say a word. Somehow I managed to free myself, bursting out of the taxi and running as fast as I could. But then I saw him running behind me, though he really wasn't human anymore. His body had transformed into a 10-foot-tall, emaciated creature with the skin color of rotten skin, and his grin stretched too wide, splitting his face unnaturally. All his limbs were grotesquely broken and twisted, with raw muscles and pieces of skin exposed. He was crawling toward me at an inhuman speed, faster than I could run. His eyes, God, his eyes. Those deep, dark pits were locked on me. Then he caught me, his claw-like hands gripping me so hard as he rose into the air, flying with me into the sky. I could feel my body going limp. I was paralyzed with terror as he leaned close to my face and said, "You'll never escape me. It's the second time you've dreamed of me. Third time you won't wake up." That's when it hit me. I had dreamt of this terrifying man before. It wasn't just a nightmare. This was the same creature. Hadn't remembered until then. Then in real life, as I was in bed, I started to feel his breath on my face. So real, as if he was inches away. I knew it was a dream, but for a moment I thought it was actually happening. So I was trapped between waking up or not. Both scenarios seemed terrifying. I tried to wake myself up, desperately struggling to move, but I was frozen. Finally, I broke free and woke up. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. What if I dream of him a third time? Sorry about the crazy people outside, I can't control it. I made a ghost communication app, and I think a demon spoke to me. I watch a lot of investigator YouTubers like Sam and Kobe, and I've seen the equipment that they use. I've also seen some others use apps on their phones, but I've always felt that phone apps could be easy to fake, so I thought, I know how to code, and I wonder if I could program my own app. I managed to get the code working, and basically how my app works is it picks up either a tap on the screen or a phone physically moving. There's no EMF or anything, it's all actually physical touch. When it picks up one of those two, it randomly selects a word from a huge list of words and displays that word. Couldn't get the text-to-speech to work, so it just pops the word up on the screen. I sent the build to my phone and began testing it. I waited a while, and this was the first conversation I had. This is not the demon, just one of the tests. Me. Anyone there? My phone. Josh. Me. Okay. Hello, Josh. Who are you? Father. Oh, are you a father? No. Oh, are you asking me if I'm a father? Yes, I am. Wife. Wife? Do you mean my wife? Danger. I immediately closed the app, freaking out, and went to check on my wife because that was weird. My wife at the time was also heavily pregnant and was due any day. Every time my wife has been pregnant, I've had the fear of her dying in childbirth. So, when I told my wife she was in danger, that she was close to giving birth, it just really got to me. That weekend, my wife went to the hospital and gave birth to her daughter. But during the birth, she, my wife, lost a lot of blood. So seeing that message freaked me out even more. Everything was fine, she's alive and well, but it still freaked me out. Now, going back to when I was testing the app's movement detection sensitivity and trying again to get TTS to work, I must have messed up somewhere. After I sent it to my phone and started it, it went nuts and cycled continuously through words. Too fast for the text-to-speech to say the word that it picked up. But it did stop on 3 words and said them. Those words were demon, acknowledge, and me. Soon as I heard it say those words, I didn't react audibly. Calmly picked up my phone, closed the app, went back to making adjustments to the code. I have limited demonology knowledge, but I do know that if a demon asks for acknowledgement, you do not do it. Something happened in collage. Probably college. This incident happened to me and my friend in college. There we go. So, a little backstory. For entering the collage, we need an ID card. We can also load money onto the ID card and swipe it to mark our attendance and to purchase food from the canteen as well. So in the break time where we can chill and eat, my friend, being my friend, took my card as he didn't have his own. He went to get something from the canteen. During all of this, the break ended and all of us went to our respected classes. I had a free lecture and went with my other friends to another class, which was in another block, to sit and just chill. Those classes are meant for students who have a free lecture so they can study or complete their work. So that time I was unaware that the friend also had a free lecture and was looking for me, thinking that I'm in my class, and went to my original class where he thought I would be and returned my ID card. After he went to my class, he got to know that I wasn't there and left my card with the teacher. Meanwhile, something or someone that looked like my friend but wasn't him entered the class and came to me. He looked strange and seemed like he didn't want to talk or to keep the whole interaction very short. He gave me my ID card, turned it back, and as soon as he did, I asked him to sit down. He replied, saying, "I'll be back in some time." Then he went away. Also, when he came in the class, he was looking down and looked at the door while entering like something was there. Which, I gotta say, is totally opposite of his personality. He's usually always smiling. He's liked by everyone. After all of this, after maybe a minute or two, he again came back as if it was the first time that he came. He entered with his usual smile, shook my hand, told me that he had been looking for me to return the card and had dropped it off in my class with the teacher, to which I told him that he had just given it to me, which I showed him. We both had spoken over it multiple times. It's not possible that I went to my class and came back before he came back to the other block. That's because there's only one way to walk between those blocks, and it's not possible for anything human to go to the other block and get the card and return back and sit in class while my friend's coming from the original class to the other block. That's at that same time. Even the teacher didn't tell me anything once I returned to my class after the lecture ended. This friend has been with me since more than 5 years, and I know him in and out. I just know when he's lying. I remember his face when I told him all of this. I'm sure that whatever he's saying is true, and even whenever I think of this, it gives me some kind of a weird feeling, as if something that was him but wasn't present there for whatever reason. A dead woman's rose bush. A few days ago, I was home, well, not quite alone. My 6-year-old son was asleep. My partner and his grandmother had gone to the hospital due to her having a concussion. His sister was at work, so it was just my sleeping son, 2 little dogs, and myself. There's a red rose bush next to the front porch. I had been nursing it back to health because it was planted by my partner's late mother. It's something I want to do for my partner and his sister. And to honor her memory, it's looking great. I had left a rose cut from it in the front porch. That was a few nights before. Stayed there through fairly heavy winds. While they were gone, I poured my coffee in a mug with a big, pretty, bold red rose painted on it. Then I looked out in the front door window and noticed the rose was no longer on the railing, but was on the porch floor, right in front of the door and at the top of the steps. I didn't think much of it, and I didn't open the door. My son was still fast asleep. I went to the back porch to smoke a cigarette and drink my coffee. Letting the dogs out with me, I noticed one had gotten away from my sight. Probably the road around the front. So I opened the back door to go inside the front porch, but planning to come right back, just left it open and the other dog right there to either stay out or follow me in. The door opens inward into a bedroom. I quickly walked through 2 rooms and opened the front door to see if the missing dog was at the road. He was. I called him and he started running around the back of the house. But I instantly noticed the rose was gone. It wasn't there anymore. I hesitated a few seconds, looked around, and noticed nothing else was off, went back inside and shut the front door behind me. This all took less than a minute, if that. My son was still asleep. I hurried back through the 2 rooms to get to the open back porch where one dog was, and hopefully the other dog had gone back to. I froze when I saw the back door was closed completely. The dog I had left on the back porch had been shut out, looking in at me. That door is not easy to shut. It basically has to be slammed or just carefully and firmly pulled shut with 2 hands. I just stood there for a moment, freaked out, staring at the dog looking in at me. My heart was skipping beats, you know. Then walked toward the door, opened it, went out on the back porch and looked around, seeing nothing but the dogs. It really unnerved me because there's no way the dog could have shut the door. It isn't possible. I made sure that there's no one else in the house. Never heard anyone. No signs of anybody having been in the house or outside creeping around, but that doesn't mean that they weren't, you know. My son never woke up, and I did tests to see if me opening and closing the front door would at all affect the back door, but no, it didn't. Couldn't have been wind because the door opens inward, and the door is hard to close and the AC wasn't on. What made it a little bit creepier to me, to be honest, was that before I went out into the back porch to smoke and let the dogs out that morning, I poured my morning coffee in a cup with a big bold red rose painted on it, taking it to the back porch with me. Once a while back, I was relaxing on the front porch. My phone was just a couple of inches from my feet. If you hear my dog barking, it's just because there's a bunch of crazy people outside and I have horrible landlords. And quite frankly, I've had horrible landlords for the entire years that some of you have been hearing me. But today, I gotta put up with it. So we continue on, and you hopefully ignore that. It requires a PIN. No programs were running at the time, no alarms set, and I can't set my alarms to play songs from my music program. I was actually kind of meditating. Not deep meditation or anything, just relaxed breathing. basically with my eyes closed. Totally lucid, listening to things around me, that sort of thing. The breeze, chimes in the distance, and insects. Everyone else was inside and asleep. I could literally look inside the window behind me and see my partner sleep on the couch. It was like 3 a.m. Suddenly I heard music from my phone. It was unlocked and my music program was open and had started playing a song. This song is about a woman not being able to tell if she was experiencing reality or a dream. Her imagination playing tricks on her, her sense of time being confused, showing up in the future like I've been here before. How could she hear bells and wind and a song in her heart? Like a ghost in the streets, a very intense song, and quite personal to me at the time. I was sober. I never found evidence of malware on my phone, but obviously I can't be sure somebody wasn't fucking with me. Anyway, both experiences were pretty unsettling to me. Maybe my phone glitched. Maybe a person was creeping around last week. But my partner's mom had a very strong personality and spirit. Died too young. She was wronged by her mother and grandmother, right up to the day she died and even to this day. I got a thorn stuck in my finger, tending that rose bush. When it finally came out, I was oddly a little bit sad. I felt strangely, instinctively protective over her daughter, my partner's sister, despite us having conflict. I know that we were quite different, but in some ways quite similar, and suffered many uniquely similar hardships and were horribly mistreated and abused in many similar ways, particularly by our mothers. My son, who has a very similar personality to hers, was born just 2 weeks after she died. Just many coincidences that have slowly come unveiled over the years. Who was this woman? This story happened to me when I was a school student. I was 9 or 10 years old back then. I was in my way from school to home. There's no school buses in my country, so children go to and from the school accompanied by their parents or just by themselves. I was alone that day. That's when I was about to cross the road and I was waiting for the traffic lights to turn green. The strange woman approached from behind. She was young with pale skin and brown hair of neck length. She was wearing a long, ground-length dark brown coat with a hood. It was strange for me because it was the first and last time I've seen someone wearing such clothes. People around didn't pay attention at all. It's like they didn't even notice her. Once she approached, she immediately started to stare at me. I looked at her too. She had green-brown eyes, but her gaze gave me a very unsettling feeling. It felt like I looked into the abyss. Kind of cold, heavy, and a deep gaze. There was something ancient in her gaze. She smiled a bit, but her gaze didn't change. I averted my eyes and turned away. At this moment, I heard her voice. The strangest thing about it was that it sounded in my head. Her voice was surprisingly very beautiful and light like the whisper of the wind. Hard to describe this voice. The most suitable word is rustling. She asked, "Who are your parents?" I answered nothing. My head was empty at that moment. I turned to her and she was still staring at me with a smile. Finally, traffic lights turned green. I started to walk. She's walking next to me and I never heard the sound of the steps. Her pace was slow and deliberate. The contrast with hurrying people around, and this encounter lasted for a few minutes, but it felt like eternity. Once we crossed the road, she turned the right direction while I was walking ahead, and I stopped for a few minutes to look after her. I don't know why, but I felt like a strange wish to go after her and ask her questions about who she is and what she does and what she wanted from me. I didn't do it. Some of the people I told this story later assumed it could be the Grim Reaper or the Angel of Death, or... After this encounter, I started to feel a strange longing. It wasn't a constant feeling. I feel it when I'm depressed or get through crisis, and for some unknown reason I feel a strange connection with her and wish to see her again and talk to her. This memory doesn't feel scary, but warm. I don't know what to think about it. Who is she and what did she want? Why do I feel this way toward her? Time to tell my story. Heavenly Encounter. When my sister and I were young, about 5, that's me, and 7 her, the daughter of my mother's friend, about 6 years old, passed away from cancer. She was my sister's best friend at the time, and it was hard on all of us. After some time had passed, must have been a few weeks, my sister one day told us that somebody was at her bed the previous night. An adult person, probably male. She told us that the person communicated with her not by words, but by feeling. She couldn't really put it into words. She said that it convinced her that her friend is in a better place now, and that she's not to worry. She was convinced it was God or an angel, and I, being 5 years old, was kind of freaked out, but also really didn't buy her story, without outright telling her that I didn't. More time passes, I'd say about 3 weeks. At this age, I commonly got up at night to join my mother's bed for the rest of the night. But this night it just so happens that my sister was up as well, asked if she could be with her mother instead. I offered her the deal that I would get used to sleeping in her bed instead. I'm not sure why. Guess I just wanted to change and that my effort wasn't for nothing. I feel ya. Anyway, I got into her bed. Her room was next to my mom's room. I wanted to take a look at them in their bed when I noticed a tall, shadow-like person at the end of the bed. It was a bunk bed, meaning that this person was floating. I immediately hid under my blanket. My heart was racing. When I looked again, carefully, it was still there. A black, male-looking person, like a shadow, completely black, transparent and with no details to make out. It was just standing there, not moving or doing anything whatsoever. I hid under my blanket until just sleep overcame me. I'm not sure what happened the next day, if I keep it to myself or if I told my mom and sister. But eventually, I concluded that it must have been the same entity my sister had seen prior. It's my dog yawning. However, it wasn't communicating with me. I told myself that maybe it was just confused to find me in her bed. Nowadays, I'm 26 now. My sister knows about my experience, and again, not sure when exactly I told her. So does my mom. My mom told us that her friend and mother whose child passed has reported a similar entity to her back then, along with other strange things that are really too much to explain now. Things that are too strange to be coincidences. My sister doesn't like to talk about this topic. Says that she thinks she was probably dreaming, which wouldn't really explain my experience. And I personally have no idea what to make of it. At about 17 to 19 years of age, I became religious for some time and cherished the story. Nowadays, I'm not religious and very skeptical of the supernatural, so I'm trying to think of an explanation. Maybe something in my sister's room was throwing a weird shadow. But this shadow was floating in the middle of the room, and what about the communication with my sister, and the fact that the mother saw something similar? Haunts me to this day that I've never experienced anything similarly supernatural since. I swear to everything, and it's meaningful to me. None of this is made up. Maybe it was a child's imagination, but I know what I saw. My experience. Growing up, I've seen a fair share of paranormal things. In 2020, my aunt passed away, and during Christmas at that time, our Christmas tree would turn on and off, and we have 3 settings. That's in order to get to the last setting that you need to press the button 3 times. Sometimes it would randomly turn on to the 3rd setting. We knew it was a ghost as we had a lot of spirits in our house, including my aunt. A few months after Christmas, around 4 in the morning, we had our garage opening and closing on its own. We had called the police and they told us nobody was inside or outside her house. My mom used to be a medium, so she figured it must have been a ghost. My mom went to a medium later on and found out that the spirit does these things, and it was my aunt trying to get my mom's attention. Fast forward, now my aunt is still with us, as a spirit. In her new house, but they live in my mom's bathroom most of the time. My aunt's ring was stolen by my other aunt and was never returned to my aunt's daughters. That was until a few months ago. I noticed a reddish silver ring in my mom's bathroom. Totally a Greek echo. Brushed it off as thinking it was hers until one day it disappeared and wasn't found until a few weeks ago in my basement by me. We asked everybody we knew if this was their ring, and everything said no. Sorry. My mom, thinking it could potentially be my aunt's, went to a medium to connect with my aunt and figure it's hers. That's when we found out it was my aunt's, and she brought it here, but clearly my mom wasn't paying enough attention to notice, so she put it where most people go all the time, the basement. I wish I was more connected into the spirit world so I could actually talk to spirits. Just wanted to share my story and asking for tips on how to get more connected. I met humans with telepathy and other supernatural abilities in 2005. Back in 2005, I had an incredible experience that I'd like to share. Kind of keep this to myself for the most part, as nearly 20 years on, I'm pretty much a normal dad with kids and a career, and I don't want to, But some things that happened when I was young still stun me to this day. This is one of them. Caveat. In the lead up to the night I had this chance meeting, I had gone through quite a psychologically questionable series of events that culminated in me ending up being diagnosed with schizophreniform, which I'm assuming is schizophrenia disorder, and hospitalized. I won't go into detail on everything that occurred during this psychotic event, but it lasted about 6 months. It's the only reason I sort of keep this story largely to myself, because it provides plausible deniability to even myself that it happened. Contradictory to that, I adamantly thought this part of it actually happened. Funny how the brain works. Or is it just me? Anyway, there it is for those who switch off when stories are told by psychotics. Read on if you're still curious. I attended a party in northern New South Wales, Australia, in the spring of 2005. These quote-unquote bush doofs were frequented by odd and unusual people of different subcultures. But on this night it was stranger than the usual ravers that I was used to. Much more pleasant, much more friendly. At first, the party was relatively normal, like any other party of its type. Lots of electronic music, people dancing and enjoying the atmosphere. I was there with my girlfriend at the time, who was a bit of a free spirit and seemed to just know absolutely everyone at the party. And it really wasn't unusual. She seemed to either develop instant chemistry with anyone or already just knew people. Never got to the bottom of that. She and I mostly went our separate ways at parties. We'd just meet up randomly as the doof brought us back together. During the night of the party, I met a few, you could say, interesting people. This wasn't the first time I'd met supernatural types or had strange experiences at a party like this. But it was the first time it happened that I wasn't on drugs. The first one I remember was a guy silently gesturing to me. I sort of didn't realize he was gesturing to me, so I just stared blankly until another guy grabbed me and pointed to the ground where the dude was gesturing. As it turns out, the guy was trying to bring my attention to himself, seemingly manifesting a small energy orb the size of a marble at the tip of his fingertips. He was hovering at about a few centimeters above the ground. It was translucent, almost like a bubble. It was more dense and hovering perfectly still and seemingly manifested by this guy. Maybe he was just pointing at it. I reacted with awe, as you would, and both guys were happy with my reaction. They sort of celebrated with each other and with me, without really making sounds. I continued to party. Cool, fun, magic orb, let's go. The second one I met was when I was sitting by an open fire. She was sitting across from me. Pretty-looking white woman with short cropped brown haircut and a crochet beanie on her head. Relatively normal-looking type in northern New South Wales raver. We caught each other's eyes, and then suddenly I could hear a voice inside my head. Well, not at first. At first, we had a brief conversation telepathically without me realizing it was happening. I don't remember many of the talking points, but it was probably me thinking about how cute she was and her replying. When I first noticed it, she laughed because I instantly rejected what was occurring and physically jumped a little. She must have reassured me pretty quickly. I sat there discussing something for a long time, and again, the words were taken from me, so I can't remember much of the discussion. But what happened next was pretty intense. She told me that she could do pretty much anything, and that I could too while she was there. Wild, right? Well, she evidenced it by reaching into a fire and picking up a handful, not a coal, like a handful of embers, holding the fire in her hands. She did this with no pain, dropped it or dismissed it, and then showed me no injury and told me to try it. So I did, and it worked. She was like the previous dudes, completely thrilled, and her joy actually was so palpable it completely washed over me. It was an intensely euphoric feeling, paralyzingly so. Pure joy that overwhelmed every one of my senses. The next thing I know, I'm being stirred awake by a random raver-looking dude, and it's dawn. I'm snuggled into a sleeping bag, and under a tree. Had the best night's sleep ever. He gives me a small, thimble full of hot brown liquid and gestures for me to drink it. Ooh. He seems super awesome, so I do. It tastes sort of like coffee, but a bit different. Very pleasant, warming, and soothing. I get up and I notice that the party looks different. There's no cars around, nobody drinking, nobody passed out on the ground, nobody looking like a post-doof regret partier. Just 20 or so very quiet, very peaceful people and the DJ. And then my girlfriend sitting with them on a rug as they cooked up a hot meal, some sort of stew or vegetable curry. So I walked over to her, but as I did, I noticed that more people were emerging seemingly from behind the trees in the forest that were surrounding the glade the party was in. All of them were attractive, but not overwhelmingly so. Men, women, even kids all emerged from behind the trees. And I don't know how many, but the party picked back up and they basically all just started dancing with each other and being merry. No talking, though. Only me, my girlfriend, and the girl from the fire, who were now sitting next to my girlfriend, seemed to talk. I walked over to them and must have had a look of shock or awe on my face when both of them had a look of complete contentment and happiness, which calmed me a bit. They gestured me to sit down, so I did. They served me a bowl of food, and I wolfed it down. Next thing I know, I'm laying face down and completely incapacitated. All I remember is a feeling of mild static electricity in the back of my head. I eventually came to and sat up, and they asked if they could paint me, so I let them. They drew on me with dye or ink. It was pleasant enough. Everybody was still having a good time. It took what felt like 15 minutes for them to finish. As soon as they did, the music stopped. People started retreating into the forest. Their demeanor changed into almost hostile. My girlfriend told me that we had to go. She almost dragged me out of the glade and down a small lane that quickly turned into the main road back to the highway. Suddenly, all the hungover people and the cars were all visible again. We walked about a kilometer back to the main road and attempted to hitchhike to the nearest town, which took ages. Eventually, we finally got collected and I was able to look in the mirror. They'd painted me in the most incredible clown makeup you've ever seen. It was really impressive. But I certainly felt like I'd been, mocked or even laughed at. My girlfriend and I drifted apart not long after that. And as I said, this was a small part of a larger series of events over a fairly long period. My memory of the time isn't amazing for the number of reasons, but this night stuck out for obvious reasons. Good writing. Does anybody else just casually have a ghost they consider a friend? So, I've been wondering about this for a while because there's a spirit I just for some reason named Daniel all the time. And for as long as I could remember, I know I used to be able to see him, but over time stopped. But I could always be able to tell his presence and can tell what he's doing at times. He's kind of just been with me everywhere I ever was, and when others who didn't believe in ghosts met me, they end up believing. That's because Daniel will at some point make his presence noticed one way or another. It became a completely normal thing to me that I'm desensitized from it, but the first time anybody else sees it, always freaks them out and they ask why I'm just so casual about it, saying, "Oh, that's just Daniel." Mostly he messes around. I can often hear his footsteps at night, but also I've heard whispers here and there. Sometimes things have been moved, and a few examples are I watched a cup lift up and fly across the room once. My mom's keys went missing, and eventually it was found in a spot we already all clearly looked at, but the hiding of the keys prevented us from being in a major pile-up accident that we would have had, been on time on. When I was a lot younger, Daniel would freak me out a lot, especially me in a bad mood. He sort of resonated, which ended up scaring me as a kid, and when I told my grandma I absolutely refused to go into my room, that's when she believed me. My room was extremely cold compared to the rest of the house. It's hard to explain my communication with him because, well, I can just tell here and there at times cues on what he's feeling or wanting. Kind of like how people can tell without words, like an intimate partner's thoughts or wants in the moment. Back when my boyfriend and I first met, he thought I was like crazy out of my mind due to dealing with a lot of traumatic things at the time. But when he asked to find a very specific thing, that exact object fell off a stand next to him. That's when he was like, "Okay, I believe you now." It wasn't hanging on the edge, it was not tilting at all. It just fell over with zero explanation, which is something I see often, so it doesn't really bother me. My boyfriend thinks it's wild that I have such an active spirit with me. This morning I was trying to find zip ties to put around the door hinges because it broke. Ooh, that doesn't sound safe. I just need a temporary fix until I can get a proper door frame up again. I'm zip tying the door hinges to a metal frame attached to the wall. It's just enough to close the door properly. After about 20 minutes of looking for it, I complained about wanting to find zip ties. Went upstairs and I came back down. The zip ties were neatly placed right next to the door I was trying to fix. I thanked Daniel essentially, and my boyfriend's like trying to wrap his head around how that's even like a thing. How I'm actually having a friendship with a spirit that interacts with me and me back to it like it's another person. Made me wonder if anybody else has an experience like this. Story time, since y'all like ghosts. On a warm summer evening, my then 10-year-old son and I went to the gas station. We went to run a couple of errands. I left my son in the car for a quick minute and ran into the store to prepay the pump. After I'd pumped the gas, I got into the car and my son says, "Mom, this weird lady was driving around and she was in the parking lot. She was staring at me." I immediately felt very protective of my boy and said something to the effect of, "I wish a motherfucker would." Some necessary backstory. My grandmother, my mom's mom, had a very tragic life, and sadly lost her only son at about 5 years old. He caught strep and traveled to his kidneys. Oof. Couldn't be helped. This was back in the day of doctors making house calls. So my mom says she remembers hearing the adults say, "Who's going to give him the shot?" Morphine, likely to put him down. My uncle's name was Tommy. My oldest son, Giovanni, bears a huge resemblance to my Uncle Tommy, to the point people see Tommy's photo and think it's a present-day antique photo of my son. Okay, back to it. So now my son and I are driving to the ATM about 1,000 feet from the gas station. That's where we were just at with that creepy lady. Pulled up to the ATM, and lo and behold, this woman followed me from the gas station. She pulls up next to my car on the passenger side and stares at my son. I opened his window enough to be heard and asked, "Can I help you?" This woman's older and clearly has psych issues, but she's with it enough to look at my child and ask, "Is that Tommy?" My heart jumped into my throat. All I said was, "No, honey, that's Gio." She didn't say another word. She drove off, and that was that. I did notice that she drove a dark green sedan, which ironically was the same color that my late grandmother drove. When I got home, I immediately told my mother what had happened, and her jaw dropped. She said, well, it would make sense for my mother to be looking for Tommy. My grandmother had been dead for about a decade when this incident occurred, and there's absolutely no way to explain this. My grandmother, my mom, Tommy had all lived in Illinois, not Connecticut, where we live today. My mom says that Tommy got another chance through my son, and I'd like to think that she's right. That was a really, really creepy experience. The sound. So this is going to be a rather long story. So if you have to listen, please read on. My name is David. This is my story of the spirits that were involved in several different ways, and in different times in my life. It starts with my sister's old house. She had gotten it at a great deal. It was located very close to a working cotton gin. This is in the Mississippi Delta in the 1990s. My sister had went through a rough divorce and was taking care of her children best she could. I was at an age, I was 19, spent a lot of time running off to New Orleans on adventures. Those times back then were a riot, but let's stick to the story. So I saw on Bourbon Street the usual clamor around a place called Mary Laveau. It was apparently the voodoo queen of NOLA. The shop was actually the house that she lived in. When I walked up to the house, the usual people are standing near, just deciding if they have the gall to enter. One girl was there with two friends. "Come on, Dana." Dana refused to move. She said, "You guys go ahead, I don't want anything to do with it." So, what I thought I would do was grab a funny gift from my sister while I was there. I found a doll made of Spanish moss and a book of similar spells that they use these in the works of hoodoo. Don't know if that's different than voodoo. Now, about then is curiosity, not really anything else. I just wanted to have a laugh. When I brought them back along with more innocent gifts to her kid, she just laughed. "Can you imagine," I said, "people doing these archaic spells to win love?" They do it. We both laughed about it, and fast forward to 3 weeks later. It was late as hell, and I got a phone call with my sister saying the strangest things. She said she was touching her in the shower and she was crying. I said, basically, what the hell are you talking about? There's a ghost here, and he's shaking the windows and doors are opening. He keeps touching me while I'm undressed. Okay, so I thought she was playing a joke on me. I laughed at her. "Sure," I said. "I'll be right over." When I got there was something strange about the house. But honestly, I wasn't really paying attention. I laughed at her some more and told her that, "Go have your shower. I'll watch for the ghoul." So she goes, gets in the shower, and I sit alone in the living room. It's really cold in there. Kept getting this feeling of being watched. It was completely quiet, and then it started. Some noise very far away. What was that? Closer it got, and I knew what the noise was. Wolves howling all at once. It sounded absolutely terrifying. Imagine the sound you would hear right before a giant werewolf bit you, tore your body to shreds. Then all of a sudden, something that you can never forget, ever forget. That horrifying sound suddenly was on top of me. I was going to die. It's over. Something's going to kill me. More noises came from the sound suddenly. A man was in there. He was howling as well. He was the pride of the pack, and he wanted to kill me, personally. No visuals during this, except that the door swung open. I ran, tripped over a few things, fell into a coffee table. Ended up crawling to my sister's bathroom. Banged on the door. Oh my God, please, please let me in. Something's after me. Got inside, hit on the floor. Sister looked at me, and that's when I realized it was real. But it couldn't be really this stupid movie shit. This isn't real life. But it was. And it would end up being the worst beginning of anything that's ever happened to me. All my beliefs lay on the floor. My bravado lay on the floor. Something evil is here. And if I don't help my sister, we could both end up in a nightmare that I couldn't get out of. If anybody wants to hear the rest of my real story, like it please. Love of a father for his daughter from the other side. I've always been spiritually inclined. Growing up, I used to see orbs and would predict certain things. As I grew up, being able to see orbs faded, and for a bit, so did the predictions. The past few years, they reappeared with each getting stronger than the last. I have the unfortunate gift of being able to tell if somebody's passed or if it's going to pass. This used to be just a feeling of dread and feeling sick to my stomach as if I were experiencing grief, but never knowing who or how it was going to happen. This feeling would continue until I was made aware of the departed by their family or friends. Back in 2023, my dad was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. I had laid down within moments I awoke. I just witnessed my dad's life from that day to this very end where I was standing at the podium reading his eulogy. A few months ago, I had a nightmare of my grandmother passing from drowning or not being able to breathe. A week later, I started feeling the sinking feeling. I took the day off. All I could think about was figuring out arrangements for if or when my dad would pass and speaking to him about what he wants done. Contacted my parents, and as we ended the call, I specifically said I love you to them individually instead of in general. That day dragged on with the constant feeling and racing thoughts of my dad until suddenly my dad passed away in their small town hospital after drowning in blood. My grandma passed away 2 weeks to the day after him. I had been having health concerns that I didn't have time to address through the months and year due to being there for my family. My dad's only come to me in my dreams twice. One of those being on Christmas. I woke up with excruciating pain that I brushed off with some alive. I continued with my day. I began having feelings of dread and a constant voice in my head that sounded like my dad. It was saying to get to the cities and not to stay around the small town. As I drove to the cities, I noticed an orb in a video, just taken. I thought of my dad. Shortly after capturing the orb, intense pain came over me suddenly. Tried to brush it off again, suddenly I felt this urgency and validation to go to the hospital. I ended up needing emergency surgery that night. I had been bleeding internally. My dad passed September 25th. Happened to me December 25th, 3 months to the day of his passing. Wait a minute. Yeah. My dad's spirit is the reason I'm alive today. He continues to watch over us and send us signs every day. I miss him. And yeah, that pause was me being unsure of how many months away that was. Dream of an ex-partner. I'm not a hugely spiritual person, but this particular dream situation has me questioning the strange and wonderful ways of the unknown. Back in my early 20s, I was in my first, I guess you could call it a relationship. It was a serious one. Spent 4 years together, most of it happy, but punctuated by some hurtful things the person did and said to me. We broke up and it took a long time for me to process the hurt, as it often does. Now at 32, I've moved on, live in a different city, and I'm happily engaged to a new individual. In the autumn, or fall of this year, I had a dream about my ex. I dreamt I had met my ex in a pub across the road from my new home. We were sat opposite each other. He didn't communicate verbally, but he looked really happy and healthy. Gave me no apology, but I decided I didn't need it anymore. I spoke to him to say, "I forgive you." This seemed to bring a huge smile of joy and relief across his face. I felt no resentment toward him, just a sense that I was so pleased that he was happy in his life, and that so was I. I woke up thinking that was weird, but I felt a sense of growth and a feeling of having moved on with my life. It had been several years since the breakup from my ex, so it seemed to come out of the blue. But I didn't linger on it too much. I just thought it was nice. At the start of December, about 10 weeks after the dream, I got the news that my ex-partner died in tragic circumstances back in September. We weren't in each other's lives anymore, so the news took some time to reach me. I'd forgotten about the dream I'd had a few weeks previous, until my sister asked me, "When was the last time you thought about him?" It was only then that I remembered it was the "I forgive you" dream. We both looked at each other as if to say, "That's kind of eerie." It certainly felt very poignant. Like I said, I've never been the hugely spiritual type, but the fact I had this dream at the time when I had no idea of his passing or so long after a breakup, so very strange to me. I won't try and make sense of it too much, but I will cherish it. Wanted to share it with others. Wherever you stand in regards to spirituality, I think the unknown can be incredible. How I conquered sleep paralysis and banished negative entities. This sounds useful. I've seen quite a few posts from people asking for help on protecting themselves from ghosts or sleep paralysis. 3 years ago, I successfully defended myself from an attack by a lower astral entity. I'll explain what I mean by that soon. Ever since then, I'm prepared to defend myself. If they tried to attack me via sleep paralysis again, I just used this method. If this helps one person, I would say it's worth it. Firstly, I want you to keep an open mind. I never believed this stuff myself until I kept getting sleep paralysis and attacked by these nightmares. Secondly, I need to preface this with the research I've done in my own experience to help you understand what's going on. Demons and negative entities exist. There's a huge plane which we cannot see, but some people can via third eye. That's because they're vibrating at a higher frequency. I know of people that have seen ghosts, but the person right beside them couldn't see anything. It's because their frequency was too low and couldn't perceive it. As you walk around, eat and sleep, there could be negative entities looking at you. If you're doing negative actions like smoking, drinking, or doing drugs, negative music, negative thoughts, watching horror movies, this will attract them because they feed off your negative energy. Loosh. Loosh in parentheses. They could also be staying where you're living. When you go to bed at night, your physical body is sleeping, but your etheric body is traveling in the astral plane. In this place, your thoughts and feelings are increased. Time does not exist. Not every nightmare is a demon attacking you, though. Sometimes it's your own thoughts because you're projecting it to yourself. When you're sleeping, your body is in a vulnerable state, and they could try and feed off of your fear. I also like Halloween for this reason, but that's another topic. The one thing these negative entities are scared of is positive loving energy. Not necessarily relationship love, but universal love. Think of your pet when you give it a hug or pet it. That's the energy. Anyway, my story. I was renting a place and didn't know, but there was a lot of negative people around me in this building. Smokers. I would do my positive meditations at night and then sleep. I would usually get attacked and I couldn't move, but I could feel an entity feeding off of me. Their goal is to make you scared and feed off of your fear, in parentheses, loosh again. This is food to them. Kind of like, like laughing. It's good energy for you. One night I'm sleeping and I felt my body constricted, like almost a snake. I couldn't move and I couldn't wake up, which is common. I'm being attacked by a negative entity. It doesn't like my positive energy. In the astral dimension, there's no time and my ego is totally gone. I felt totally helpless, basically. The negative entity tried to scare me, and it said something like, "Your family doesn't love you." At this point, I knew what to do. Started sending as much positive, loving energy as I could, and I swear to God it worked. The more I sent, the less my body was constricted. Couldn't tell how much time passed, but I kept sending the energy like a beam of light. Eventually, my body was completely freed, and I instantly woke up. And from that day forward, I knew that negative entities exist, and I have to watch the energy I'm sending out. One more story. A year later, I moved back home, did my usual meditation, went to bed. I was no longer afraid of these entities, but that night I got attacked by another. This was the most powerful negative entity I've ever faced. The usual happened. I couldn't move or open my eyes, and it started stealing my energy. I knew what to do, but this thing was fighting back. I could feel its weight on my body. Kept sending my positive energy, but it was sending its own back. It was like two lightsabers grinding against each other. But the lightsaber was my entire body. It took everything I had out of me. This thing wouldn't leave. I don't know how much time passed, but eventually I could control my body, but I could feel it trying to suck me back into its grip. I knew it would keep attacking me, and at this point I put on the most powerful meditation music I could. It gave me enough of a boost to scare it off. Anyways, the energy you're sending out is important. Send out positive energy, and they have no chance against you. I won't argue on your last point, but I will push back on quite a few of your former points. Think about it. Sweet dreams.